On and we're going to talk about San Bernardino. There were some pretty interesting races in San Bernardino yesterday, including the city attorney's race. A longtime incumbent Jim Penman faced a challenge from David McKenna, but he was able to win another 4-year term on as city attorney. And of course, for a lot of people, he's maybe the only city attorney they remember in the city of San Bernardino. He's a veteran of politics there. We're now joined by San Bernardino City Hall reporter Brian Rokos, who's going to discuss and talk with us about that race, as well as Press Enterprise columnist Cassie McDuff, who writes a lot about San Bernardino. Thanks for both of you for joining us today. Let's start with the city attorney's race. That one was pretty high profile. Give us a rundown of the candidates, Brian, how long Penman has been on the board, and the type of issues and challenge and the type of challenge he faced from David McKenna.
Jim Penman has been city attorney for 24 years, 6 terms, so he just won a 7th term. Lifelong San Bernardino resident, San Bernardino High School graduate. He enjoys a wide base of support, businesses, former attorneys, former judges, and the people on the average voters. David McKenna, the challenger, is a former San Bernardino County supervisor, former San Bernardino County public defender. He had been living in Riverside County until unknown persons recruited him to be a candidate against Penman.
Right. What were some of the key issues that dominated that race? Why he was obviously unsuccessful in convincing voters that he should succeed Jim Penman as city attorney, but what was he campaigning on? Why was he saying that he would be better off than Penman? Obviously, the voters disagreed.
Well, Penman has a reputation, and he obviously has a different version of it. The Mayor Pat Morris, over the weekend on his Facebook page, accused Penman of bullying and intimidating city employees. Former Police Chief Keith Kelmer cited trouble from Penman as a reason for retiring. Public Works Director Nadeem Majaj recently wrote a memo to Penman accusing him of bullying and trying to intimidate him. And this, we keep hearing stories about this, and it didn't resonate obviously enough with voters for McKenna to win, even though he had endorsements from all the newspapers.
Right.
In the area.
We keep hearing that, but it seems that Penman remains pretty popular, and maybe and Cassie, we can get into this with you a little bit later, but it appears that, and I don't know if this came up in the campaign, but it appears that maybe voters want that kind of check and balance in the city of San Bernardino, because obviously the city attorney Jim Penman is not on the same page politically as Mayor Pat Morris.
Well, during the campaign, Jim Penman told voters that he is investigating unspecified people at City Hall. He used the FBI investigation at the San Bernardino airport, telling voters that you need me to watch over the city, prevent corruption. Jim Penman referred to himself as a public watchdog, and David McKenna as the political lapdog of Mayor Pat Morris.
Right. And just as a reminder here on the vote totals there, these are, of course, the final election night semi-official results for the city attorney's race. And, of course, there are provisional ballots and any kind of vote-by-mail ballots that were dropped off on election day still to be counted. Generally speaking, though, those generally, unless there's an overwhelming number of them, do not change the outcome of elections. But 6,130 votes, or 51.9%, so just shy of 52% for City Attorney Jim Penman, and 5,677 votes for David McKenna. Cassie, let me turn to you. What struck you about this race between McKenna and Penman?
Well, I would say for a 7-term incumbent, that is a pretty close race. You would expect somebody who's been in office that long to win very comfortably, and in fact, it was one of the closest races in the San Bernardino city races.
Mm-hmm. So it was close, but he was able to pull it off. Do you have any? What's your take on some of the reasons why you think Jim Penman was able to, even though it was closer than what maybe he has had in past elections, why he was able to pull it off?
Well, as Brian said, he does have that constituency of people who view him as the corruption watchdog in the city. He's always able to cast himself that way right before the election and imply that there are pending investigations of alleged corruption. Right. He hasn't made any specifics known. I don't know really what they are. But I really don't think McKenna ran as strong a campaign as he could have. I think that one thing that could have hurt him was that he was newly back in San Bernardino after 5 years away, and that he hadn't voted in Riverside County during the 5 years that he lived.
Yeah, I mean, do you expect that could have hurt him? Because, I mean, San Bernardino is a city that faces a number of challenges. Do you think voters might have seen it, hey, we want one of our own, so to speak, as city attorney, maybe did not view him as one of their own because he had lived outside of the city for a few years?
Well, it may have hurt him just enough to keep his votes down so that he couldn't topple Penman. But as I said, a 4-point difference between a challenger and now a 7-term incumbent, that's pretty close.
Right. Brian, you wanted to jump in.
Well, one of the things in talking with David McKenna's own campaign staff is they acknowledge that he's not a politician. He's a former judge, public defender, and he's a semi-retired civil litigation attorney. And someone made the comment that he was late to arrive and early to leave events. He said, no, that's not the case. But they said he's not a politician. And Jim Penman's a politician. Jim, in the campaign, consistently hit anti-McKenna points very hard.
Well, and after 6-7 terms, he's a seasoned campaigner as well. You were at both of the election kind of campaign headquarters last night. What was the mood like at both of them?
Well, it was interesting in that David McKenna actually arrived a little bit after the first initial results were announced. It was very quiet, a couple of dozen people. I think people were hopeful at the McKenna campaign. I went to the Penman event. Actually, it was Wendy McCamick, Councilwoman McCamick, hosting Jim Penman, as well as some of the other council candidates, and it was very, very festive, very confident people, very celebratory, and the place was the restaurant was overflowing with people, and just if you counted noses, you could see the breadth and depth of the support for Penman.
Right.
And David McKenna told me that he was surprised during the campaign that that there was that much person on the street support.
One of the things that we touched on at the very beginning of the show with John Bender, who was an editor, of course, overseeing our election coverage, is you don't see this too often on the local level, but there was clearly Jim Penman was running on a ticket with a number of other candidates who also did very well yesterday. He had campaign signs made. They had campaign signs together with one of the city clerks. Cassie, did that surprise you how there was kind of this ticket running together so closely? I mean, it's one thing to hold similar views politically and where you want the council to go. But to have those campaign signs together, to have them running together as a ticket.
Absolutely. I've never seen it before in a municipal election. I've never seen a city attorney candidate align himself with a city clerk candidate, and in fact, the rest of the slate. I think the factor that joined them all together, in addition to simply Penman's leadership, was also the backing of the labor unions, the public safety unions, the police and fire unions, who got out there and put signs up, lawn signs in neighborhoods, walked precincts for all of the candidates, and there were 5 of them at the party that Brian mentioned last night. I think when he was at the McKenna one, I was at the Penman one, and vice versa.
Right.
But it was interesting to see how many city employees there were, particularly city attorney employees there were at that event.
Right. And I want to get into the city clerk's race here in a minute, but one of the ones that may surprise a lot of people if they're waking up this morning and looking at the election results was an incumbent San Bernardino City Council member, Tobin Brinker, went down in defeat, or is headed that way. Mm-hmm. I mean, by not a small margin either, 69% to 30%. Brian, how did that? What were some of the dynamics in that race?
Well, it could be something as simple as a broken streetlight. John Valdivia campaigned, as did all the candidates, talking about basic things like potholes and streetlights. And Valdivia had a slogan: "Your pothole is my pothole. Your broken streetlight is my broken streetlight." And he said that Tobin Brinker had ignored those issues. I'm sure Mr. Brinker would disagree with that. John Valdivia had more than 90% of his campaign funded by the police and fire unions, and I think he received upwards of around $60,000, which is far more than Mr. Brinker spent.
Now, was he on this so-called ticket with the city attorney?
Yes. In fact, Jim Penman, during a council meeting this year, said in open session, "I encourage everyone to vote for John Valdivia, Chaz Kelly in Ward 5, and Wendy McCamick in Ward 7, and Amelia Sanchez Lopez for city clerk."
And we should note that Chaz Kelly, an incumbent, appears headed for a re-election, as well as Wendy McCamick in those two races. Other members, Ricky Van Johnson in Ward 6 in San Bernardino was running unopposed in that race. Cassie, were you surprised that by the results in that Tobin Brinker race?
Absolutely. I think Brinker has a pretty good depth of support among his constituents. I mean, one example is when the Orange Show rave was keeping people awake, he was getting text messages from all over his ward, and he was answering each of them. So people have his cell phone number in his ward. I think what really did him in was that he has been pushing and pushing for pension reform, which would require particularly the public safety unions, which, by the way, the fire union is now at an impasse with the city, to fund a share of their pensions. That issue is what brought the union support out in favor of Valdivia, and Brinker said they just hammered him with negative mailers. It was a very negative campaign.
Mm-hmm. The city clerk's race, this was the incumbent was not running for re-election, and this was a pretty crowded race, and I guess this will go to a runoff?
That's right.
February 7th.
I made that mistake earlier in the show, but they will go to a runoff in February. Brian, give us a rundown of when the runoff is and who's going to be in that runoff.
It'll be Amelia Sanchez Lopez. She was supported financially by Jim Penman. They've known each other for 35 years. She's been on various city boards and commissions. She'll be opposed by Gigi Hanna, a former newspaper reporter and has worked in public relations. And that'll be February 7th. Rachel Clark, the retiring city clerk, said she's going to urge the city council to have a mail-in election rather than a more expensive election where you would go to the polls.
Right, and we apologize for the graphic there. We'll try to get that corrected as soon as we can. But it is Sanchez Lopez versus Hanna in a February 7th runoff race. Cassie, you had some thoughts on this race. I mean, generally, city clerks' races are, hardly anyone pays attention to them. But I don't think that was the case this time around in San Bernardino.
Well, that's right. This time, the city attorney, as Brian mentioned, endorsed very heavily one of the candidates and, in fact, shared his campaign signs with her. So they ran as a duo to citywide offices. What was interesting was that no one from within the city clerk's office ran. Usually there is someone who is ready to fill the shoes of a retiring or departing clerk. No one ran. Some people have said that's because no one wants to deal with all the turmoil that's stirred up by the city attorney, and other people have said that's because some of the leaders in that office don't live in the city. They live elsewhere. You have to live in the city to be able to run.
And did the incumbent weigh in? Did she endorse anybody, or just kind of decided to stay out of that race?
She stayed out of it. She felt that it was important to stay neutral, and she was not at any of the parties. I went to 3 of them, 3 of the top vote getters, and she was not at any of them. It was interesting to see which city members of the city staff were at the different events.
Brian, were there some issues that dominated that city clerk's race? You went to a number of the forums.
I can't say that there were. I mean, people were saying, I will keep accurate records. I have training. I have experience. Peggy Hazlitt is an assistant in the mayor's office. She ran for city clerk. Obviously, she's not part of the runoff. Amelia Sanchez Lopez, during one of the forums, talked about avoiding corruption, and I think that was largely seen as a scripted comment provided by Jim Penman.
There were some accusations toward her that she was just saying and doing things that Jim Penman wanted her to say. How did she respond to some of those accusations?
Well, there was a famous incident at a Democratic club forum where Mrs. Sanchez Lopez and was Esther Gigi Hanna was there, and Esther Jimenez were there. Not all the candidates were there, but depending on who you talk to, I believe it was Gigi Hanna asked from the audience a question of Sanchez Lopez, and if you talk to some people, they said that she couldn't answer the question and that Jim Penman stood up and answered it for her. Penman and Sanchez Lopez said no, she answered the question just fine, and that got a lot of buzz in the. I don't want to say it got a lot of buzz in the community, but certainly people on the inside. And talking about the community, I think it's important to note there was about a 15% voter turnout.
And interesting, created some buzz, and of course us political reporters found it interesting. Cassie, let me get your final thoughts on the city of San Bernardino's races, particularly the city attorney's race and that council and that clerk race.
Well, I think with the upset of Tobin Brinker, who's been allied with the mayor, that the mayor has some real concerns about losing his 4-vote majority out of the 7-member council. Now the majority is going to go the other way, and the mayor will have some trouble probably getting through some of his initiatives, and there may be a lot more turmoil and name-calling and unpleasantness on the council, which the council is already known for. Do you suspect
that the mayor will maybe have to change and how he approaches some of his initiatives?
Well, certainly he'll have an uphill battle. I think even just the unpleasantness and the exchanges. One of the events I went to last night, there were 2 Highland council members there who said, "Gee, we're sure glad that our council doesn't behave like this, because it would make it real difficult."
Well, Brian and Cassie, I appreciate you joining us. Just to recap those San Bernardino races, City Attorney Jim Penman appears headed for another term. There was an incumbent, Tobin Brinker, who lost his re-election bid against John Valdivia, and a city clerk's race that will head to a February 7th runoff. So that is kind of a recap of yesterday's election. There's a lot of important school board and municipal races up on yesterday's ballot. Thanks for tuning in, and of course you can head to the pe.com or pick up a copy of the Press Enterprise for the latest election results, and of course we'll be following these races as the new members and incumbents take over on new terms. So again, I'm Dwayne Gang, a politics reporter for the Press Enterprise, and thanks for watching.